This is the first time I've been on an actual stage in 2 years, so it's really good to see your faces IRL. Thank you for coming today. Where I'm going to talk a little bit about empathy and why I think maybe we should focus on empathy instead of authenticity as a way to trade up to better reach our audience. Now, I don't think they handed one out to you before the conference, but if you had a conference bingo card for a marketing conference and you had the word authentic or authenticity on it, free space, because we have been talking about authenticity since the beginning of social media time. I don't think anybody has been trying to mislead us. I think we always had an idea of what we wanted to have authenticity mean, but I don't think it's the right word. In the immortal words of Inigo Montoya, we keep using that word. I do not think it means what we think it means. And let's look at what it means. Authentic just means real. Should you be real? Yep. Have we learned nothing from misinformation in the past 4 years? You should be real. Absolutely. But being real and being authentic doesn't force you to think about your customers. It still allows you to think about what you want to say and how you want to say it. And why do I know it's not working? I have data. 92% of us, okay, that's everybody in this room, thinks we're creating authentic content. How many of you think you're creating authentic content? Everybody's hand should be up because we've been talking about it for 15 years. However, only half of our audience thinks we are. That's a big difference, a big difference. Plus, 2/3 of us in this room plan to keep doing what we're doing. It's working, we're doing good. However, 15% of our audience doesn't care. That's all the people who want to see our branded content. So if I think authentic is the wrong word, and I think empathy is the right word, let's talk about what empathy means. Empathy means I feel you. I feel how you feel. Now, it's different than sympathy. Sympathy still allows you to be authentic. These words are cousins, but sympathy is just, I know how you feel. I don't have to care, but I know how you feel. Empathy is I feel how you feel. And when a lot of people talk about empathy, they use the metaphor of walking in someone else's shoes. I think that that is impossible, and I'll tell you why. Because if you pick yourself up and step into someone else's shoes, you have no idea of what it took to get them here, and you have no idea what they're going to take to go forward. So I'm going to challenge us, when we're understanding empathy, to take this metaphor a step further. Empathy is walking beside. Keep your own shoes on, no matter how sparkly they are, and step next to your audience. Go on the journey with them. Walk where they walk. Because you don't know if their shoes are brand new, maybe they're rubbing a blister, maybe they're old shoes, maybe they don't fit. Can I get a hands up, ladies? Maybe they are high heels on cobblestones, maybe they are slippers on grass. You don't know. Empathy is walking beside. Now, I don't want you all to go Google the definition of empathy because I will give you a hint. You will find hundreds of definitions. That's because this is a new area of research for neuropsychologists and neuroscientists and psychologists and psychiatrists. And I happen to know there are hundreds of definitions because I'm co-authoring a book about empathy. Shameless plug, due end of next year from Pearson Publishing. But for the purposes of this conversation, I want us to think about empathy as walking beside. I feel you. Let's look at a couple of marketing-y words. I don't know if marketing-y is a word, but I'm making it one. Trademark, Carmen Collins. Let's look at transaction or relationship. How are you viewing your customers? We're all marketers here. We're all trying to sell something. That's our job. It's what pays the bills. But do you think of your audience as a transaction, or do you think of them as a relationship that you're building over time? Which one is empathy? Building a relationship. Which one is authentic? A transaction. A campaign versus a conversation. A campaign still allows you to get your bullhorn out and go do-do-do-do. Here's what I want to say. I am right, you are wrong. The end. Whereas a conversation allows you to ask your customers, what do you think about our product? What do you think we should be talking about? What do you like? What do you not like? Sell versus help. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but selling, again, makes your audience a transaction. Helping helps them along a journey. Data versus storytelling. This is my favorite. I cannot tell you how many times I've had a business client or a consultation client ask me to put in social media that we are #1 in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for our industry. Great. And I'm not being sarcastic. Great. That is good for you. However, what does it mean for me, the consumer? Tell me how you being #1 makes any difference for me. So data versus storytelling. Because no one likes being marketed to. Flash poll audience, how many of you in the audience love to see Instagram ads? You're watching your favorite YouTube channel, you see an ad pop up. How many people love that? There's usually always one. Today you're a good audience, there's nobody in the audience. Nobody likes being marketed to. If you don't like it, why are you trying to do it for your customers and your consumers? This is why influencer marketing has become the buzz in our industry. That's because influencers have already built that relationship. They already have empathy for their audience. And we're trying to come in from the sides and go, ooh, me too. There's a survey that comes out every year called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And every year when this comes out, you should immediately go read it because there are always some really interesting tidbits in the Edelman Trust Barometer. This year, this is my favorite. This is from the 2021 survey. People trust influencers who are more relatable. That is, they have more empathy or they feel more empathy from, than those who are most popular. Now, maybe that doesn't make a ton of sense because as a brand, you're like, I want to get my brand on the most popular influencer channel. Do you? Or do you want to go a little more niche to the place where the influencer has built that relationship? They are relatable. Why are they relatable? They have empathy for their audience. So how can you be relatable? Well, I'm going to use a story about the apocalypse. Why? Well, it's almost Halloween, seems kind of seasonal. Also, 2 of my favorite TV shows ever happen around the apocalypse. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, If the Apocalypse Comes, Beat Me, and also The Walking Dead. Now, I'm going to use The Walking Dead as an example. If you're unfamiliar with the show, basically, the world has ended. We're all infected with something that turns us into a zombie when we die. Or you can get bitten by a zombie and speed the process up a little bit and die and become a zombie. The writers of The Walking Dead know something that you don't know, but I'm going to share it with you now. Your brain has evolved to not comprehend big numbers. And I don't mean you don't understand them. When I say billions and billions of people on the TV show The Walking Dead have now died on this planet and are now zombies, you know, you get an idea, that's a big number. But your brain doesn't relate it to your experience. So the writers of The Walking Dead focus on a small group of survivors and what they have to go through to get by and live in this new world. The zombies are set dressing. They're a secondary part of the story. Yes, they're a danger, they're always there, but the real danger is from meeting other people and other small groups. That's because your brain can identify with that small group of survivors. Just out of curiosity, any other Walking Dead fans in the room? Okay, for those of you that raised your hand, I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you have ever driven by a well-fortified park or place? For example, for me, I live about 45 minutes south, and we have Nathan Benderson Park. It's got a man-made lake. It's got a huge tower. It's well defended, and you've thought, that's where I'm going when the zombie apocalypse comes. I know you all done it, and maybe some of you who don't watch The Walking Dead have said, you know, if the world ends, this is where I'm going. The reason is that you now empathize with these characters. You empathize with them. You start to think that their experience is yours. And that is what makes it a great TV show. Here's a great example, which is specifically about empathy, from the Soul Pancake YouTube channel. The name of the video is up there if you want to go see the video in its entirety. But this project, or this theory that they were going on, is they wanted to help people understand the problem of homelessness in America. So they divided their research subjects into two groups. The first group was shown a video of a lot of data with some sad music in the background. There's a screenshot of the first screenshot on my slide is one of those data pieces. 600,000 people on any given night can be affected by homelessness. They interviewed that group after showing them the video and asked them questions about whether or not they understood the problem. The good news is that they all kind of got it. They're like, yeah, I see it's a big problem. But they use these kind of words. I don't know what to do about it. How can I help? What's it have to do with me? What can I do to influence it? The second group, which is screenshotted at the bottom, saw a video of one man, one homeless person who talked about his experience, what he has to go through to get food, shelter, how he feels when other people judge him. And they asked these participants what they thought about the homeless problem, and every single one of them were moved to emotion. They said things like, that could be my grandfather. Or, holy cow, I'm one medical crisis away from homelessness myself. The study went a little further. They hired an actor to play a homeless person outside of the studio with a cup asking for money. So after the participants were done, they passed this homeless person on the street. The good news, again, authenticity is not wrong. They didn't lie. They didn't tell you bad data. Those people gave the homeless person money. It's not wrong. But the people that saw the second video gave 3 to 4 times more. That's why empathy is a greater way to trade up to better reach your audience. Okay, hopefully I've taken you on this journey and you're like, okay, empathy, that's what I need to be focused on. But I'm a little fearful that maybe half of you in this room are like, great. Empathy, people stuff, squishy people stuff, soft skills, that's just not me. I'm not good at this. Man, I'm in trouble now. Good news, this is a myth. Most of us think you either have empathy or you don't. I'm going to debunk that myth for you right now. There's a researcher, an empathy researcher out of Stanford. His name is Dr. Jamil Zaki. And he calls this the Roddenberry Effect. Why the Roddenberry Effect? He happens to be a fan of Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek. And there are 2 characters on Star Trek The Next Generation that exemplify this idea of either you have empathy or you don't. There's Commander Data on the one side, who's an android, can't feel human emotion. His entire character arc is trying to understand his colleagues and become more human. Then on the other side, you have Deanna Troi. She comes from a planet where her people are empaths. They can feel what you feel before you tell them. It radiates off of them. Okay, another flash audience poll. How many of you think you are on the end with Commander Data? Wow, I'm in a room full of marketers. How many of you think you're on the side of Deanna Troi? Good, this shouldn't be that hard then. Yay, it's going to make my job a little easier. There's another research study that tried to test this idea of you either have empathy or you don't. And this was testing whether women were naturally more empathetic than men, because women have more permission from society to be empathetic. They're expected to have empathy, whereas men are expected to be stoic and strong. So again, this had 2 focus groups. The first focus group was an equal number of men and women, and they were given a questionnaire. They didn't know it was about empathy, but they were given a questionnaire and told to complete it. At the end of the questionnaire, they took them up, they calculated the results, and sure enough, women had more empathy than men. However, they wanted to test this a little harder. They did the same study with a second focus group, same number of men and women, but this time they told the men that if they scored well on the questionnaire they were about to get, they would get $50. Not fair. But okay, we're testing. I'll give them a pass. In the second study, they scored equally. Empathy is like the mixing board in the back of the room. Sometimes you want a little more bass. Sometimes you want a little more treble. Maybe you want to pull the instrumental back and push the voice forward. Empathy is a skill. It's something you can learn. You can practice it. You can use it in some situations and not in others. Empathy is a skill you can learn. Good news, practicing it is a lot of fun. Read a book. I've had the last 2.5 weeks off. I have reread the Harry Potter series again for probably the 100th time. The more fantastical the book you're reading, the more different it is from your day-to-day life, the more empathy you're going to be practicing. The second thing you can do, listen to music, preferably a lyricist. Any Swifties in the audience? My favorite lyricist at the moment. Her songs transport you to another experience. Listen to music. Watch movies. I just heard that the new Fantastic Beasts movie is coming out in April. Squee! Make sure that you go back and tell your bosses that this is how you practice empathy. And Carmen Collins said that you could read a book, listen to music, and watch movies at work. I'm just kidding. Please don't do that. Highlighted. Great. I also want to encourage you to practice self-empathy. I want you all to know that you all have had one heck of a several-year period. It has been hard. It has been hard. And you need to give yourself some self-empathy. They don't call doom scrolling for nothing. When you work in this space, other people can say, I'm turning off Facebook or I'm turning off Twitter. We can't. It seeps in the edges. Have empathy for yourself. Why? Because 70% of your thoughts are negative. And I'm not telling you that to make you feel bad about it. It's another one of those tricks of evolution. Your brain is hardwired to pay more attention to the negative things. You had to remember, oh, those mushrooms, can't eat those. Or that's a cat and that's a saber-toothed tiger. Two totally different things. One will eat me. Your brain is hardwired for this. So if you start to realize that you need to have self-empathy, you can start to help yourself through when times like this get hard. And there's another researcher, her name is Dr. Kristen Neff, and she talks about self-compassion, which is a similar word to self-empathy. And she says you should thank your brain for the negative thoughts. This is how you practice self-empathy. You should say, thank you, brain, for trying to keep me alive and not make me a part of the zombie apocalypse. I appreciate that. Thank you for trying to help me survive. But there's no saber-toothed tiger right now. I'm not eating mushrooms. I think I'll take another path. But thank you. And this will help you start to develop self-empathy. Okay, I've divided my tactical application here into two sections. The first is 4 ways you can incorporate practicing empathy in your daily work life. And then I'm going to give you 4 tactics that are very specific that you can just go do right now. So let's start with how you can incorporate empathy into your practice of marketing. Listen. We have talked about social media listening and focus groups and listening to your audience forever. But I want to ask you, when you do this, are you actually listening? Or are you doing a slide that says we have this much positive sentiment, this much negative sentiment, we've grown by 2%, or we've fallen by 1%, here's your slide, you're welcome. Or are you thinking about, why have I got more positive sentiment? Why has the sentiment fallen? Maybe you're asking yourselves, are we really listening to all of our audience? Because sometimes in your business, you may be talking to introverts. Are they participating? Are they talking in social media? What do you need to do to reach that audience? So listen, but make sure you're really listening. Don't sell, help. Now, I have gotten really good on LinkedIn when I get a connection request, knowing whether that person is trying to hard sell me something. How many of you have this filter when you get in LinkedIn requests? Yes. Hopefully you've gotten good at it too, but occasionally someone will slip through. Occasionally. They'll be connected to 50 other people I know, and I'm like, okay, well, this has got to be somebody in the social media space that I should be connected with. And when they slip through, they'll write me a note and they'll say, hi, Carmen, I heard that you worked in social media for this company, and I have a new social media listening tool. When can we find 15 minutes to connect? Are you kidding me? Have you not lived through the last 2 years? I have enough WebEx calls that I could just spend 12 hours a day doing just that. And if I had 15 minutes, I would probably try to find something to eat or get up and move around, maybe take a potty break. I mean, things you don't get to do anymore. But then, very rarely, someone will slip through and they'll say something like this. Hi, Carmen, I saw the LinkedIn article you wrote about empathy and social media listening. And I have a social media listening tool that I think you might find useful. But I'm just going to drop this Forbes article here for you because it has to do with what you wrote about. And when you have a need, let me know. Meanwhile, if I can open my network up to you and make any introductions, let me know. It's the difference between selling and helping. It's still a salesperson, but there's a difference. One has empathy, and one is just transactional. Always be aware. Empathy is like the Force in Star Wars. It can be used for good, and it can be used for evil. And that's what I want to make you aware of. I want you to be aware of how empathy can go wrong so you can make sure that it doesn't. There are lots of ways. There's an entire book about it if you're interested. But the first thing I want to bring up is always be aware of bias. You would think if you're practicing empathy that you would be less biased. Yes, if you're using empathy for good. However, that brain of yours again, man, evolution comes back and bites us sometimes. Your brain has been trained to find people like you. You have been trained to find your community because together you have a better chance of surviving. So when you make that conscious choice to walk beside someone, chances are you're going to walk beside someone whose journey is a little easier, whose journey looks a little bit more like you. Because the journey that's very different is very uncomfortable. And that's okay, but it's important to know that to make sure you don't fall into the bias trap. Personas. How many of you in this room have written personas for your marketing? Personas are heavily biased if you're not paying attention, down to the avatar, the picture of the person that you're using, because you're making assumptions. Have you walked beside that audience enough to really develop that persona? A lot of marketers are moving away from personas and looking at things like empathy mapping, just to make sure that they don't fall into the bias trap. The second thing I want to point out is since none of us fell on the spectrum with Commander Data and we were all thinking we're more on the empath side of things, you can get trapped up in an empathy vortex. Think of it like the Sharknado of empathy. You can start to care about so many things all at once that you get caught up in a whirlwind and you can't move yourself out of it to action. There's a movie called Ever After, which stars Drew Barrymore. And in the movie, it's a remake of Cinderella. And in the movie, the prince says, I thought if I cared about one thing, I would have to care about everything, and I would go stark raving mad. That's what the empathy vortex is, going stark raving mad. It's easy to do right now. Think of the Facebook apocalypse that happened a couple of weeks ago, and everybody in this room probably freaked out at first. Oh my gosh, I can't post on Instagram. And then maybe an hour later when you realized it was going to be an all-day thing, you're like, wow, this is kind of nice. Yeah, Facebook should never come back. Be aware that you can get caught up in an empathy vortex. Use that example of what it was like for one day to be Sans Instagram and Sans Facebook, and think of how nice that was. It lets you step out of the vortex a little bit. So be aware of those two things. And then keep being human. I think when we've been talking about authentic and authenticity all these years, this is what we were trying to get to. I just think it was the wrong word. Because when we roll into work, because we don't go to work now, most of us, we roll in our pajamas, maybe, still. We put on a hat. This is our social media marketing hat. And we forget what it's like to be consumers of social media. Think about what you like in your Instagram feeds or your Twitter feeds, or what gets your attention on LinkedIn. What stops the scroll with your thumb? We forget that we are consumers of our own product. We need to eat our own dog food. So don't take the human hat off. If you see something on Instagram, for example, the thing that gets me is I know that they say they're not listening to me, but the Instagram ads are creepy. So good, they're creepy. If that bothers you, it's bothering your audience. If you see a horizontal photo in a vertical space and you click X and then you do it, your audience is clicking X. They're Xing out of it. So just leave your human hat on. Don't change hats. Just be human. That's really what we're trying to do with empathy. Okay, now we have 4 tactics that you can use right now that show your audience that you are using empathy, and here's the bonus: they get you better metrics. Doesn't that make you happy? You can go back to your boss and say, look at how much I've grown this Instagram handle over the last 6 months. It gets you better metrics. Why? Because people don't like being marketed to, and you're going to show them that you're trying to relate to them. Design for mobile only. We used to talk about mobile first. When 90% of your audience is on their mobile device, my argument is that's everybody. Y'all, they are building stoplights into sidewalks in some places because we're doing this, and we're not looking up, and we're walking into traffic. Or like I did a few months ago, I was walking around my neighborhood watching TikTok, because that's what I do, and I walked into a big branch and cut the back of my leg because I wasn't paying attention. That's because we're on our device all the time. I lost internet a few weeks ago, and it was like the apocalypse. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to, talk to my husband. So 90% of your followers are on social media, are on their mobile device on social. So design for mobile first. What do I mean? Well, the only people using social media on their desktop are us. They're us. Now, some of you may have seen me say this before, and you're like, Carmen, you're recycling jokes. Yes, but until we get it, I'm going to keep saying it. I put this on LinkedIn, and guess what I got? A LinkedIn Karen. And she said, well, I'm not a social media manager, and I'm on my desktop on social media. Well, trying to use my empathy skills that I'm now developing. I said, oh, really? Okay, why? And she says, well, I'm not really technology savvy. I'm a little older, and I want to keep up with all the trends, and I want to know what the cool young kids are doing. Well, that's a start towards empathy, but you're not experiencing it. You're not walking beside them. You're trying to pick yourself up and put yourself in their shoes, and that's not how it works. So it's important to remember that your audience is experiencing your content on mobile. Stop doing this. Oh my gosh, stop doing this. How many of you would turn your phone to read that text? 0 of you. I still see it. Make sure that you're creating content that is designed for how your consumers are seeing it. Here's another one. Now, I have empathy for Amex here because I'm fairly sure that some uppity up someplace said you have to put a link in the caption on Instagram. And somebody probably said, but you can't do that. There are no links on Instagram. And they're like, just do it. And you wanted to keep your job. And you're like, fine. But if you're going to put a link in an Instagram caption that you know is not clickable, at least make it a vanity URL. How many of you are going to remember this URL and open a browser? Think of all the extra steps you have to go through. Open a browser, remember the URL, type it in. You're going to mess it up. You're going to have to go back to Instagram and get it and type it again. Design for mobile. Design for how people are reading your content. Design for readability. If you've heard me speak before, you know this is the hill I'm going to die on, probably sooner than later. Stop writing novels on your graphics. These are actual screenshots. I did not Photoshop these from my Twitter feed. Without looking at the text field of that first one, what's that speaker's name? Where's she from? What's she speaking about? Stop doing this. I can't tell you how many times in the past year I've had somebody come to me and ask for a social media card. What the heck is that? Oh, it's a novel on a graphic. I got it. No. You have double the text, 280 characters now on Twitter. Put the information in that section and make the visual compelling. You're trying to get people to stop their scroll with their thumb. They're scrolling right past you here. You could say, Carmen, they can open the graphic and read it better. Okay, do you do that? I would bet not, because I have seen metrics that say people are not doing that. It's an extra step. The second one, I went to the University of Virginia. I bleed orange and blue, so when I make a call out for UVA, you know I'm serious. This is a football player who got accepted on scholarship and wrote a thank you letter on a graphic. I don't know who was responsible for him getting here. We won our game last weekend, so yay. I mean, thanks to them too, but I don't know who they are. And even the thank you is in weird font and stretched out. If you can read this, I will give you a cookie. Stop doing this. Your reaction right now to this is your consumer's reaction when you do it. Now, I get a lot of questions after speaking on this topic, and they're like, Carmen, how can I convince the people I work with to stop doing this? How do I talk to my designers? How do I go back to the business who's asking for a social media card and explain to them why I want to do it differently? Empathy. Your designer. What is causing them to give you a graphic like this? Maybe it's their leadership. How do you convince them? You have empathy. Walk beside them. Figure out what's holding them back. Take your phone and show them the last piece of content they gave you with a novel written on it and ask them if they can read it. It takes time, but empathy is how you do this. How do you tell the business? Show them the metrics the last time you did this. Say, would you mind if we try something different and let's compare? This is the hill I'm going to die on. Please stop doing this. Design for accessibility. I usually have a lot more accessible tips in here, but I happen to know that there's a masterclass coming up later this afternoon that will be filled with accessibility tips, so I'm just going to give you this one. Use camel case when you're creating hashtags with multiple words. That means capitalize the first letter of each word. It's accessible because if you have a visual impairment and you are using a screen reader to read the internet, it will pause when it sees a capital letter. So it will read this as use camel case. That should not be wrapping like that, sorry about that, or embrace accessibility. Without the camel case, they read it as use camel case, embrace accessibility. Now, it's understandable, but it takes your brain extra time to figure it out. Here's the thing about this. Doing this is way bigger than accessibility. Have any of you ever gotten an ad on Twitter that says, we'd like your opinion on a survey? And you take the survey and they're asking you about, did you recall seeing this ad on this date? Even if they scroll past your content, people can recall your message if you use camel case. It's a split second. Think how fast social media moves, how fast your news feed goes. Save people whatever amount of time you can to get your point across. Use camel case. This is my favorite example of not using camel case. I don't know what y'all are laughing at. That clearly says Amazon's hit car show. Right? I know that's what all of your brains thought when I put it up there. Now, you could argue based on the content of that show that they did this on purpose, and they got people talking, but were they talking about the right thing? Did they tune in? Use camel case. Make it as easy as possible for your audience to recall your message, even if they scroll past it. Design for the channel. I have seen an increased number of Instagram ads on my feed in the past few weeks, advertising apps that make your Instagram profile so beautiful that no one can resist it. They will take one photo and split it into 9 different photos that don't say anything individually. They will spam your audience's news feed with those 9 photos, one right after the other, just so your Instagram profile page looks like this. I want you to go to your Instagram metrics, and I want you to take a look and see how many people have engaged with you on your Instagram profile page. And if there are people who are engaging with you there, I want you to ask yourself, did I send them from an Instagram newsfeed post to link in bio? Why are they there? And why are you spending time designing content for a place no one goes? Where do you engage on Instagram? You as consumers, in your newsfeed, stories, reels, and yet to be determined Instagram videos, since that's a new thing. How many times are you going to somebody's profile page other than if you are being directed via link in bio? Design for the channel. Okay, let's recap. Empathy is greater than authenticity. We have been talking about authentic content forever. It's not working, it's not sinking in, so let's take it a step further. Let's use the right word. Let's use empathy. Empathy is the new authenticity. Hopefully, I've helped you understand what empathy is. It's not putting yourself in someone else's shoes, it's walking beside them so that your shoes start to feel like theirs. And it will never match. It's never going to be exactly. You will never fully understand what someone else is going through. But this is how you get to that place. You can learn empathy, and it can be fun, and I still encourage you to tell your bosses that I said you could read, listen to music, and watch movies to get better at your job. And then the actionable content tips include designing for mobile, designing for readability, designing for accessibility, and designing for the channel. I appreciate your time. Thank you for not going into a food coma, I hope, after lunch. And I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you at a future digital summit. Thank you.